Our guest today is David Guion. Give him a big call. Big clap.
Thank you.
He's going to talk about his father and World War II bombers. And before he speaks, I wanted to make a mention of, y'all remember Marlene Kingle? She was involved with the group and all that.
Klingle?
Klingle. Mm-hmm. She passed away September 23rd. And she wanted everybody to let know that she had died. And so like, just remember her and her family, stuff like that. And
very sweet lady. We went on a lot of trips with us.
yeah, a lot of
We
trips.
enjoyed her. Well, thank you, Mark. What a crowd, Mark. What do you must be giving something away, and I want one of them.
Yeah. It's our speaker for today.
But seriously, I'm really pleased to see everyone here tonight. It's a wonderful audience, and means a lot to me that you all braved the cold, and on a Friday night this close to Christmas, that you all didn't have something else better to do. But I think I hope that the things I share with you tonight, you can be equally glad you came. Got a couple of disclosures that might or may not affect the program. Number one, I've had bronchitis, so I've got a little problem there. Number two, I've never done a PowerPoint before. My first experience. And thanks to Mark, I got through it. And Sherry, she was very patient. And I'm not a public speaker. So it's not going to take you all long to figure these things out. And the most important one, I am not and I don't claim to be an expert on this subject, okay? I'm just a guy who got interested in what his dad went through the war. And all of us have kin folks that were in the war, and they didn't say much about it. So I had to dig some of it out myself. And Dad was a B-17 co-pilot. So my presentation is going to be on the Flying Fortress B-17. And it was in the European campaign, the war against the Axis, against Germany from England. And you know, a lot of descriptions of it, you can go on and read a lot about it, a lot of books, a lot of YouTube stuff. There's a best-selling author, Kevin Maurer, calls it the bloodiest military campaign in aviation history. And of course that could be arguable, but it was extremely dangerous, extremely bloody. And what these, I'm going to be emphasizing the crew as much as the plane, because it just so much sacrifice there and so much that they went through that hopefully that you'll leave with a different aspect of that. And we don't, and the thing is, we're losing history, okay? They're writing it out of the history books. And it's just, and in another generation or two, I'm afraid people will have no appreciation for the sacrifice that this generation did. So Mark, we'll get started. First, I always, while I was doing this, I came just, I like quotes. And several things came to my mind as I was going through this. First one is Jesus Christ, Matthew 24:6, and ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. And he was talking to his disciples. They were wondering about the end of time and things. And you know, that's, of course, kind of a paraphrase, but it's true. I mean, it was true then, it was true before him. And of course, all his words will forever be true. Right before World War I, H.G. Wells was a British commentator, and he was not, he was against World War I. And he said, World War I will be the war to end all wars. If he could have seen, I don't think he lived to be into World War II. Okay, on December the 8th, probably one of the most famous statements we know of, FDR, before joint session of Congress, referred to Pearl Harbor on December the 7th. It's a date that will live in infamy. I totally agree. I think that one event, Pearl Harbor, served to galvanize the American fortitude and attitude more than any single event in the history of America. And people could argue with me about that too, but I would challenge them, because I think that single event just did so much to galvanize the United States. President Lincoln's famous address at Gettysburg about all those men, North and South, they gave their last full measures of devotion on that battlefield. And so did these men in World War II, in each war. And then the last one, we're familiar with the quote or the phrase, I guess, the greatest generation. And I don't disagree with him at all that this is the greatest, but just he didn't coin the phrase. Retired General James Van Fleet in 1953, before Congress again, referring to the World War II generation as the greatest generation. Now, whether Tom Brokaw took that from that or not, I don't know. Next slide. All right, this just gives a perspective of the advance of aviation in such a short period of time. You know, Wright brothers, 1903, and then first air flights, airplanes in World War II. I had an uncle that thinks he saw the first dogfight in World War I. And he said they were flying around, they had pistols. But then the first email servant flights, and then 1936, the Germans get credit for this. They were advanced in their military prowess. They had been in a war with, or had participated in the war with Spain. Mark, people might want to get a chair or two back there. You know those guys.
2 seats right here.
So, of course, in the meantime, the B-17 and the other fighters, but short period of time, the advances that aviation made, just almost unbelievable. Mark? Okay, here's some background that I came up with, and this basically shows the rapid growth of the Army Air Corps. That's what it was called at the time. Pre-war, they only had like 20,000 officers and enlisted men, and I won't go through for sake of my voice primarily, but you can see how the personnel increased. By 1945, at VJ Day, at 2.4 million. And look, just think of that short period of time, that the organizational challenges that went into doing this, much less learning to fly the planes and the things that we're going to see tonight. And then the planes followed the same trajectory. There were about 1,700 aircraft, mostly obsolete biplanes and World War I biplanes and early bombers. And then their strength got up to 78,000 aircraft, bombers, fighters, and over 45 times during the war was the increase. Next. All right, birth of a legend. I put this cartoon up here. How did he get the name Flying Fortress? Well, after it was designed by the specifics were designed by the Army Air Corps, and they gave out bids to Boeing and Vega and Douglas to come up with the best design. And they came out, it was actually in 1931 or 2, I don't know that date, and they rolled it out, and these guns, they didn't have but the number of guns it ended up with, but there was in Seattle, it was in Seattle, and the reporter came out, well, that looks like a flying fortress. It was published in the newspaper that way, so Boeing said, that's a catchy name, and it caught on and it's become legendary along with the plane itself. It went through several model changes. Over the years, we'll see a little bit more of that. 8 production models. The last combat flight being on April 27, 1945, the first one. The first flight was in 1935. It cost about $250,000 at that time. Now, I looked this up, and I don't necessarily agree with it at today's value, but where I looked it up was 2020 figure, and they said that would be equal to about $2.5 million today. I don't believe they could build that plane today for $2.5 million. In fact, I wonder if it was a misprint, but it's on there, and so I put it that way. They got up to an average of 16 planes a day in production. That's B-17s. That's not counting all the other aircraft, B-24s, all the fighter aircraft. But it's amazing what the manufacturing industry was able to do by producing this kind of volume in production. Mark. Here's some specifications on the B-17. This is the B-17G, probably the latest model that they used in combat that Dad would have flown. Had a crew of 10, a Wright Cyclone radial piston engine, which doesn't mean anything to me. But they said they were very powerful, 4 of them, 3-bladed engines. You've got a model right here. That was the maximum speed, which kind of cumbersome today, I guess, but at that time, for a heavy bomber, was a pretty good. It had about a range of about 2,000 miles, depending on the way they had the tanks. They had excess tanks. Had a ceiling of 35,000 feet. I ended up with 13 50 caliber guns. And the Germans actually caused, when they were in formation, because they had covered such a big area, they called them flying porcupines. There's the length, wingspan, height. One thing that I thought was interesting, you'll see it a little bit better in the next slide, I think. The thickness of that skin, it was an aluminum alloy stretched over a lot of structure, a lot of struts, a lot of 0.032 inches. That was the average. Now, in certain more reinforced places, it was a little thicker, and it was about the size of your average credit card. So that was thin. But they had to do that because of the weight. And anyway, next slide. Now here's a cross section, and it gives you an idea of how the structure went under the skin. You know, that was supporting that. Here's your where your pilot and co-pilot sit, your bombardier, navigator, tail gunners in the back. You won't see the bottom turret. See, I don't think you can see that there. Ball turret was right here. Now, I haven't used this, you can tell. There it is right in the above 6. 4 was the top turret. He had the best vantage point of any place in the plane, but he's also the most exposed. And the bomb bay was right here. There's the bombs. Dad said he had to get out a couple of times and kick some out of the bomb bay because they would get stuck. The fuses has already been set too. And the gas tanks were over the engines. They were protected better, of course. Okay, Mark. All right. The English kind of considered they were invaded by the Americans. A welcome invasion, because this had been going on since 1940 for the English, and they were getting plummeted by German fighters and bombers. So the English welcomed the advent. This is just to show some of the bases. This is the East Anglia part of England, London being, I don't know why I can't. It won't go on there. It won't come across there.
It won't show on the screen.
And these are.
I brought that stick for you.
Okay, thank you. All right. London is basically in this area. I don't see it on the map. But there were 40 some bases, total of 400 bases built in England. This is counting English bases, and that figure does, and American bases. But this is of U.S. Air Force Army bases and their locations. Dad was at not Heilbronn, that's where he was at Framingham. I can't see it right offhand. Anyway, that's
at the bottom, 390.
all right, 390. And the advantage of being in this was all in the English countryside. And they would just move right on there with the farmers. You can see pictures of farmers farming and in the planes landing and taking off the whole time. And because of the location, they were in here, and the proximity to where they needed to be, France, Belgium, and Germany on over here. So it kind of gives you a perspective of that, Mark. Well, there's the crew. 390th Bomb Crew, that's Dad's crew. Just uses him as an example. Most every crew had their picture taken just like that with their plane. Dad's right here. I've met this man. You see these pictures on the right. We visited him at the 390th Bomb Group Museum. He was kind enough to take us all over in the plane. Very, very great guy, very close with Dad. His next closest guy was Ernest Wadlow. This man right here, he was an enlisted man. I've got pictures of him on the board. I don't know a lot about him. I'm still trying to find family members because I have other material that I want to share with them. There's the pilot. I talk with his son regularly. You know, it's a challenge. It's fun, and they flew about 30 missions. Dad, as a co-pilot, Dad had the opportunity to fly other missions because he would fly with inexperienced pilots. He told me a story one time that the new pilots would complain he'd fall asleep. If you all knew Dad, he could fall asleep on a dime, and it was very hard to wake him up. They had to wake him sometimes with a 45, firing it in the ceiling. Now, that's the story. So anyway, there's an example of the 390th Bomb Group. Okay, the key statistics. It's really about 300,000 missions were conducted by B-17s across Europe. About the B-17s dropped about 640,000 tons of bombs, which is about 1.5 million they estimate were dropped altogether. I'd still be tripping over those things, I think, laying all over the place. But anyway, let's see, the production numbers, 12,731 were manufactured in that period of time. The majority were used in the European theater. Actually, they started using them, they had some at Pearl Harbor, and they didn't hardly get off the ground because of the attack. But they did put some in the air afterwards for some reconnaissance and things. The English got a few orders of them and used them before the Americans got in, but didn't have much success with them. They carried 10 men, of course. Combat losses, about 4,000 of those were actually lost in combat mission, in operations, being shot down, various reasons. And then it gives the inaugural mission was in 1942, August 17th. Some of the the worst missions, Schweifert, Regensburg, very high percentage losses. Let's see. And the significance there, it served as a cornerstone of U.S. daylight strategic bombing, epitomizing Americans' aerial strength. It was an icon. It became an icon. The 8th Air Force used like the Memphis Belle when it did its 25 missions, which incidentally was not the first. Some people think it was, but it was not. But they used that and came and promoted them for war bonds, and it became an American icon too because of that American promotion. And they were, the English, the RAF, only did nighttime. They never got up the nerve to fly during the day because their first experiences, they were getting eaten up. And so they left that to the Americans. They would fly at night, Americans would fly in the day. And so they called it strategic bombing. They weren't just going over bombing anything that moved, okay? They had strategy to disrupt the German industry and transportation networks, like, you know, the airplane factories, the train yards and things like that. And if they undermine the infrastructure, then that would cause the war to come to an end a lot sooner. Not as soon as they would have liked it to, obviously. Significant losses, we're going to see some of those in a minute, that they basically early on were sacrificed. And they were, because many of those men just knew they weren't coming back. And how they braved that, I'll never know. I don't think we have the courage and the fortitude to do what a lot of these men did. but they were committed, and they did their job for the most part. Okay, Mark. It's a strategic bombing powerhouse. There's an example here. Again, it's kind of a repeat of the last one. Symbol of American resolve and industrial might. You know, you can just see in the advertisements, when they advertised this, how the war was going, they used the B-17 and the success that they had. And I always remember, I wish I had a picture of Rosie the Riveter, because we don't give enough credit to the people that stayed home and the people that manufactured these planes and the people that were on rations and sacrificed so much, coming out of a depression, though, mind you, didn't have much anyway. But yet they sacrificed to the utmost. It was definitely a 100% team effort. This thing right here has been getting credit to the strategic bombing success, Norton bomb sight. I don't know how many people have ever heard of that. I need to use this because I think maybe some people might not be able. Can everybody hear me pretty good? That better, Bill? Because I know there's some people have some hearing impairment. That was one of the first mini computers, and enabled the sighting with as an analog computer stabilized by a gyroscope. They use different vectors like speed, wind, and so forth. They think their navigator could have dropped a bomb down a chimney. He was that good. But usually only lead planes and squadrons had that, because once the lead plane dropped, the ones in that unit dropped behind him. So it was important for those guys using this to be very well trained. And I've seen that run, one of those run. Jim, I think you've been with me down at that museum, and he had one. So, okay, go ahead. Those are, okay, go back just 1 second, please. This tail insignia, each unit had a tail insignia because that helped them to identify the different units to communicate, and also able to be able to form up. So you can go back now. Let me get a drink of water here before I get too parched. Okay, one of the iconic examples of the terror in the sky. I've read the story. I can't tell you what it is right now. The wing completely blown off, and whether any of those men were able to bail out or not, I don't know. But that's just one of many examples you can see today on the internet. The biggest casualties from flak and fighter attacks. Internal things, also hypoxia and frostbite. A lot of men had to be hospitalized for that. Actually were discharged because of that. The life expectancy in 1943 was 11 missions. They had to fly 25. So you can see how discouraging that is. When you come home and everybody in your barracks is gone. In fact, when Dad was shot down, he had to go hunt up all his. They'd already bagged him up too, his plane stuff. But and a bomber was at that time 43, which is the height of the that is bomber was only expected to last about 5 missions. Okay, Mark. Again, the flight hazards would be anti-aircraft fire, which it got the nickname flak. Just terrible stuff. And you'll see some comments on that. And there's percentages of the positions and how they were killed. Mechanical failures. There were a significant amount of people, planes that were lost in takeoff. England is still known for bad weather. A lot low fog and takeoff, forming up. They were in formations, but if they got out of formation, they could have had a friendly fire from bombs. So they were destroyed that way too. The extreme cold caused They had to use heated suits. They didn't have heat. They didn't have, of course, oxygen. They had to have masks for that. And what happened is this flak. I don't know if you had a chance to come up here, but Dad's wearing his looks like a big snowsuit, like the kid in Christmas Story. You know, he got so bundled up he couldn't walk. Well, that's what they were wearing when they were fighting. Okay, Dad was sitting down, but these guys running through this plane to different positions. They had to do that, and a flak could come and cut the oxygen line, could cut some of the heat lines that they could plug in, and they wouldn't do anything for they'd look over and a guy had fainted because he was out of oxygen. They had auxiliary box, so they had to team up to watch each other, and then just the flak, just like this all the time. And you've got the pilots trying to keep that plane under control and evade some of the fighters. It's just amazing to me what they were able to. The fatigue, of course. There was one mission here that you'll see, they lasted 20 hours. They were almost out of fuel. But 8 to 10 hours under constant stress, and then the psychological damage, post-traumatic stress was not even a word then. But believe me, there was a lot of post-traumatic stress in all of World War II, not just this. But with that type of apparel, and they describe, a lot of crews called them early on flying coffins. And the early people said these were just suicide missions. They wouldn't tell us that, but these early missions, that's what they were, because it was kind of an experiment. The Germans had been fighting in the Spanish Revolution for about 4 or 5 years prior to that. So Hitler cut his teeth on his armament, both on the ground and in the air during that war. Well, these pilots were very experienced. They just shredded the early units because of the lack of coverage from the our fighters. We had fighters, but they had very limited range, and they couldn't go through the whole mission. So the German fighters would just jump on them like bees. And here they were trying to fly through the flak and trying to fend off 300 or 400. There's an example right here of a Focke-Wulf 190. There were 3 main planes that they had to deal with. And it's just almost unimaginable. Go ahead, Mark. Crew survival statistics. This is Dad's plane, actual plane. He was shot down in January 21st, 1945 from flak. Lost enough engines. Everybody bailed out, but he, the pilot, and the navigator that I was talking about, because the last guy went out, his parachute either didn't open or was too low. And they circled enough to where they cut off a church steeple in the process, a little town. And this was several hours after they had gone. And for my good fortune, someone took a picture and it ended up on the internet. And I have a man that has taken testimony from some of these eyewitnesses, and I've got those eyewitness accounts. And some of you all, I've already shared that with you, and I'll be glad to do that with anybody. That's one example of the damage, and his primarily was from engine failure from the flak. In the early war, only 15% of the men were able to complete 25 missions. That increased to about 50%, and they went to 30 mission requirements then. And then by the end of the war, you were required to have 35 because of the increased survivability. The German Luftwaffe was almost decimated by the middle of 1945. And there was not that, flak was the main enemy. More heavy bomber crewmen were killed in World War II than all the Marine deaths. That gives you kind of a significant statistic and how dangerous that was. There were about 21,000 prisoners of war and only 24% of the crew survived the war unscathed. Now that means wounds, frostbite, whatever. So 25% is a lot of people. Dad's plane, by the way, was they named that one Sweet and Lovely. And there's a picture of what the artwork would have looked like. A lot of planes had artwork, had them on the back of their jacket. This is a separate example of a B-17 tail gunner. I was able to get that jacket, and got all the research on him. He was a tail gunner. So that is a bona fide example of what that would have looked like on the back of somebody's jacket. All right.
So one question, did your father crash in friendly territory?
It was it was in the kind of no man's land. It was on the French border, and the Americans hadn't secured it yet. They were missing in action for about 10 days. He said it was kind of a race between them and the Germans, who picked him up first, and the Americans picked him up first. And the man that perishes over there, he's buried in a cemetery in France.
So they stayed at the plane?
Hmm?
They stayed at
No,
the plane the entire time?
they hightailed it out of there.
Okay.
Told the story about a German family that put him up in a hay barn and gave him potatoes to eat. And he said, I warmed mine up, put them on my arm.
Did they ever hook up with any of them that bailed out?
Yeah, the whole crew got back together except the one that,
Before they were rescued?
yeah, they were all one unit. They stayed as one unit. Yes. Somebody say? Okay.
Your daddy said that he thought they crashed in Germany first, but it was in Belgium. But he said they hid them out until they could get them to the Americans.
Right. They hid in different places. Now, there again, he never went into detail about it. I wished I'd asked more. He just said we just hid out, like German families, wherever, until American half-track spotted us and picked us up. That's the story I got. Robert's been a good friend of Dad's for a long time, and he may have told you more than he told me.
Your daddy said they crashed one airplane on the White Cliffs of Dover.
Right.
And then he crashed once trying to land it because he was so shot up.
Right. This was his 5th mission. He lost 3 planes in his first 5 missions. The other 2 were what you said, crash landings. The plane was so heavily damaged that they were not able to use it again. This was the 5th mission. After that, he said he didn't have much problem. Okay, any other questions? All right. Built to survive. Of all the bombers in the war, this was admired for its stability in flight and under immense damage. Look at the damage on that plane. Now, in this situation, the bombardier and I think the co-pilot were killed, but they were able to fly that home and land it. Okay, the stability of that plane, the hydraulics were such that that was without a doubt the favorite plane. And there's one of the guns right there hanging out. That's just one example of, it would fly on 1 to 2 engines, not very well. Most B-17s that were shot down were because they had to fall out of formation, okay? And that was because situations like this, fighter attack, or whatever. So when they fell out of formation, the German fighters jumped on them. And it was their job to take the Germans to pick them off. Well, a lot of them were able to make it home. And of course the defensive firepower, and that was because of they learned to do formation flying, which protected each other. And it became a real morale booster for the crew. They felt very confident that if at all possible, they'd get home in that plane. And it depended on the crew. If they were meshed together as a unit, they really were able to accomplish a lot of things. A lot of stories like that too. Mark. Another iconic example of a damaged B-17 getting home. This was actually this was a crash between this and one of these. That pilot had been killed. Okay, this way. Can anybody hear that? I can't hear it. Can you hear it though? Okay. Thank you. And it just basically cut that plane in half. It was holding on by the running board that goes. That plane flew home, landed, and the tail fell off. That's a well-documented situation. But they use it just to show how durable that plane was. Mark. And that breaks down the losses in combat, enemy action. Now this, I think some of this varies from the last site I got, but when you do this kind of work, you get varying sources have varying statistics. Mechanical failure, accidents, mid-air accidents, crash landings like one Dad had, mishaps. Now, that could be friendly fire or whatever. They don't. There were over 18,000 losses. Now that includes the ones like Dad, came home and they had to scrap it, and the ones that were actually shot down in enemy action. Out of the 12,700 produced, there are about 50 intact models that exist today. One of them is in Dad's bomber group in Tucson, Arizona. I've been in that plane with the navigator, Sherry and I did. And like that, they're museum pieces basically. There are only 3 that are flyable today. I don't know if you all have heard of the Confederate Air Force. They used to fly these things around, and for a price you could fly in them. And but there have been 2 recent crashes of those, so there's only 3. So they don't do that right now, and may not ever do it again. Mark. Okay. There again, talking about roughly half of all B-17s were lost due to the Luftwaffe fighters. And these statistics you're going to see, particularly on the graph, are the early part of the war, where they didn't have as much protection. What changed the war was the P-51 Mustang American. It was developed to be long range. The gun, the armory was better, the speed was better, and they were able to compete with the superior German. And basically, just because of the overwhelming superiority and the numbers, they were able basically to destroy not only the armory of the Luftwaffe, but the morale. So the fighters didn't become as much of a problem at the last half of the war. But these are like I said, the early statistics, about 50-50. And then, therefore, that kind of goes in the catastrophic losses that they underwent when there were not long-range protection. And aircraft fire remained a threat through the whole thing. And there were training crashes, mid-air crashes, and the severe weather. The tailwinds created by these planes when they were in tight formation created a lot of hazard for them. It was despite all the other things they were dealing with, they were having to fight that tailwind from their other planes. So there was a myriad of things they had to overcome. It's amazing any of them survived. Yes, go ahead. All right, I got these off the internet. Just show you these are modern day examples that have been put in the air of the German Bf-109, the Messerschmitt 262. There's the first jet that I showed you, a model of it. That would have made a difference in the war had they had somebody to fly them. The Luftwaffe, all the experienced pilots had either been killed or deserted or retired or whatever. And after the war, there were hundreds of those sitting on the ground that had never been used. They just weren't available. And the Focke-Wulf 190 and the BF-109 were the mainstays, and that yellow-nosed one was probably had the highest statistics of taking down planes. Mark. All right. It's one of my favorite slides, not because of what it is, but just because of some of the comments that have been made. The flak being the major issue, this shows a mission with heavy flak, and we're going to see about the flak here pretty quick. These are some comments that I read in different books. These pilots talking about flak, so thick you could walk on it.
I think you're too close to your microphone.
Am I too close to this microphone?
Your microphones are hitting each other, creating feedback.
Okay, I'm sorry. Technologically challenged, guys. And it's like flying through a firing squad blindfolded. I mean, those planes basically, especially when they were on the bombing route, the IP they called it, they had to stay straight. Okay, they just take the beating, and they were just bouncing around, and that flak. And we're going to see some examples of flak here. Statistics on flak, Mark.
Go next.
Please. Most of them are 88 millimeter missiles, basically. And you can see some of the statistics. There were shells, anti-aircraft gun. The Germans were very efficient at that. They moved them around on rail. They concentrated them around primary targets. And they would use smoke screens to hide them. And it shows you, it's a fragmentation bomb basically. It was designed, they could calculate the altitude of the planes and designed for that thing to explode at that altitude. And it gives you 100 jagged steel pieces would fly out, 200 to 250 effective fragments going hundreds of meters. Well, that's one. And they would fly out thousands at a time. You see that picture here. That's each one of those exploding. Shrapnel. They also use this on the ground too against tanks and ground troops too. But so, you know, and it gives you some statistics on the shell weight and the velocity. But they were very adept at that, very well trained, and they went on through the end of the war. They were still firing on VJ Day. Okay, Mark. Okay, how they stacked up to the other bombers. B-17 was not the only player in the field, but it was the superior one. And it is being given credit to doing the worst damage. The other one was a B-24, and it's the one with the double tail fins. I don't think we'll see any here. I didn't do that. It had a longer range, and a little bit bigger bomb load sometimes, but it definitely was not as stable. And I'm just getting on this, aren't I? Is that messing up what you're going to get there? Well, let me try to talk a little loud. I don't want to. We're doing a YouTube video, by the way. Somebody you know that didn't get to see it. Hopefully, they'll be able to watch it here. The daylight precision bombing was their forte. The Lancaster was the British one, and again, they only did that at nighttime bombing. Mark. Okay, it's an enduring legacy, as we mentioned before. Memphis Belle, we've talked about that. The Aluminum Overcast. The Sentimental Journey is another one that got a lot of publicity. And at the end of the war. And when people saw those, that gave them the confidence that just made them, it just gave them strength, gave them courage. And also as much a symbol of sacrifice as anything else. Not only the men that flew them, but the people that sacrificed over here to produce that kind of volume and that kind of machine. That it was ahead of its time. It became the precursor to the B-29 that did most of its damage in Japan and actually dropped the big bombs. So it basically, they learned the whole time. They had like 8 or 10 models. They were constantly figuring out more improvements, better ways to do it, better protection for the men. And as of that, the B-29 actually saw service most of 1945, but it was in the Pacific Theater. And there's the Memphis Belle. We're all familiar with that. Some of the classic films, 12 O'Clock High. I watched that growing up. It was also a series, television series, the Memphis Belle. I took Dad to see that. And when we got out of it, I said, Dad, what do you think? He said, pretty accurate. 2 words. And we went home. Masters of the Air, Steven Spielberg. It's a part of a trilogy where he did the Army, the Marines, and then the Air Force. If you get a chance to watch that, it's still streamed. It's about the 100th Bomb Group. The 390th flew a lot of missions with the 100th Bomb Group, okay? Has anyone ever heard of the Chow Hound missions? In the Netherlands, toward the end of the war, those people were literally starving. They were still occupied by the Germans, and they were not feeding them at all. They were actually dying every day from starvation. Well, the 390th participated with other bomb groups, emptying their planes and dropping food. Dad flew 3 of those missions, and I've been able to document this with his records and the plane serial numbers. Dad was actually flying in this plane that day on May the 2nd, 1945, dropping over Valenzenzang, Holland. And you can read a lot of heart-wrenching stories how they are so thankful for what these guys did for them. Makes me want to tear up a little. But they weren't the only ones. A lot of the Air Force participated in that, but his group did, and I was lucky enough to be able to find that also. Go ahead. He also flew concentration camp victims back to back to France. He had a couple of those die on the plane. So there's a lot of stories. Yes, sir.
My great-grandfather's a fighter pilot in World War II.
Oh, great. Well, what did he fly? Do you know?
Not really.
Those fighter pilots save their bacon to a great extent. It was a team effort. In 1943, they were actually considering scrapping the bombing campaigns until they could come up with a better plan. But then they were developing these other fighter planes, which his great-grandfather might have been flying there. Famous personalities. Jimmy Stewart was a serious command pilot. Eventually he flew B-17s, but eventually in B-24s and flew a lot of missions. He actually stayed in the service until Vietnam as a he was a colonel as a reserve, and they let him fly a mission, so he said he did because he'd flown in Korea. Clark Gable, just publicity, actually flew 4 missions as a gunner, real missions. Andy Rooney was a reporter. We know Andy Rooney from 60 Minutes. He's written a lot about his experiences on B-17s. And there are others. I don't have it. Oh, Gene Roddenberry. Who's Gene Roddenberry famous for? Star Wars.
Star Trek.
Star Trek, I'm sorry. He flew all his missions and had some harrowing experiences. So there's just some of those. So everybody pitched in. He had to beg to get in the service. You're a star. We don't want you to do that. And he was underweight, but he got in and served very well. Go ahead. You can explore more. National Museum of the U.S. Air Force, American Air Museum in Britain, documentaries with veterans, and that is easily obtainable if you've got a computer. Fascinating stories. 8th Air Force Museum in Savannah. Other bomb groups, there's a lot of museums from other bomb groups like my dad's. The books, Masters of the Air was also a book, an excellent book that the movie's based off of. Flying Fortress by Edward Jablonski. If you want the technical aspects of the war, that's your book. The Mighty Eighth by Gerald Laster is also a great one. I've got Jimmy Durante, I've got millions of them. I don't have millions of them, but I got a lot of them. But, and I'm glad to share. So that's basically my overview.